Thanks very much, Richard. And again, a very warm welcome to this webinar, yarning about the referendum as part of our celebration of NAIDOC Week in the Diocese of Gippsland. Thanks for joining us in such good numbers, and I'm sure many others will access the recording as Richard has mentioned. Welcome to our special guest, Uncle Glenn Lockery, to our panellists, Auntie Phyllis Andy, the Reverend Kathy Dalton, about whom a little more in just a moment. But first, I'd like to ask Kathy if she would welcome us to country here, mindful of the lands on which we find ourselves as we gather online from many different places across Gippsland and beyond. Thanks, Kathy.
Womaninji, everyone.
Womaninji.
Welcome to the homeland of the Gunai Kurnai people. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders, the past and present, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to everybody here that is on screen and the Aboriginal lands that they are meeting on, and everybody here in this room. Womaninji.
Womaninji. Thank you very much, Kathy, and I'm sure we'd all echo that acknowledgement of the First Peoples wherever we are, including any present or any who may be viewing the recording, and especially in this NAIDOC week, we pay our respects to their elders. I'd like to offer a prayer recently written by Uncle Glenn on behalf of NATSIAC, of which he is the chair, and on which Auntie Phyllis also serves. So let us pray. God who listens, open our hearts to hear the gentle invitation of those without a voice. Placeless and dispossessed of all that was theirs, instead of anger, revenge or blame, they offer in their open hand absurd generosity, an act of transformational forgiveness from the centre of their being to ours. May we sense the integrity of country speaking to country, body to body, and find within ourselves the humility to accept and journey together to become our nation's better future, resolving our colonial memory, Australia's original sin. As Jesus gave his body for ours, help us to receive and pass on this gift of new life for his name's sake. Amen. And so let me briefly introduce our panel this evening. Reverend Canon Associate Professor Uncle Glenn Lockery is a Wiradjuri man, writer, artist and advocate for constitutional recognition of First Peoples, a role for which the Diocese of Melbourne has released him from parish responsibilities in this referendum year. And tonight he helps us to bring some faith perspectives to bear on that question. Welcome, Glenn. Reverend Canon Auntie Phyllis Andy is a priest in this diocese based at Lake Tyers in East Gippsland. Phyllis and Glenn were the first two Indigenous clergy in Victoria to be made canons of their respective cathedrals within a few weeks of each other, as it happens. Reverend Kathy Dalton is also a priest in Gippsland, based in the Western region at Morwell. Kathy and Auntie Phyllis work tirelessly in and for their communities, both in the church and outside the church. And we are immensely grateful for their respective and combined ministries. Thank you all for being here tonight for this important conversation. We're going to hear now from Glenn for the next 30 minutes or so, and Glenn's going to share some slides with us. Then we'll hear from Phyllis and Kathy for a few minutes, after which we'll open up the conversation to all of you via the chat function to begin with. And it's a bit like a referendum, vote early and vote often. Get those questions coming in as soon as they occur to you, so that Libby can help to triage those for us for a bit later in the conversation. So Glenn, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bishop Richard, for the invitation to be here. Dara Bilinya, Badu Rajri Yawanadi, Glenn Lockery, Gamambana in my language is welcome, and Yaradu Marang, which means good day. And I attached my acknowledgement of country to the acknowledgement that Kathy has given us at the beginning of this session. And I particularly acknowledge Auntie Phyllis and Kathy as people of this land and this space, and people who bring our culture, our knowledge, our wisdom into the church and into their communities. And we give thanks to the ancestors and to God for making that possible for them to do. My task tonight, and there is a slide that we're going to put up now, which I will talk about. In talking about the voice to Parliament, one of the things that we've forgotten about in this process is to remember that there is a source document from which the voice to Parliament comes. And that source document is the Statement from the Heart. Now, the Statement from the Heart was a document which was produced after an ask to the Referendum Council by the Prime Minister of the day, Malcolm Turnbull, on behalf of the government, to find out how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people wanted to be recognised in the Constitution. The Referendum Council did a process of developing a way of doing this, brought together people from across Australia in 12 different dialogues in different areas of Australia, worked carefully to make sure they had translators, etc., to help those people who speak English as their third or fourth language, and to help them to understand the process that they were in. As a result of those 12 dialogues over 12 months, or thereabouts, there was a 13th dialogue which sort of was cut short. That was in Canberra, but there were around 12 to 1,300 people involved in that process of dialogue and talking. They then went to the Referendum Constitutional Council out at Uluru, and at that constitutional convention, they wrote the Statement from the Heart. A Statement from the Heart picks up the four key elements, four key aspirations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is voice, treaty, truth, and Makarrata. And it picks up the aspirations to build to walk together in relationship to develop a better future for our nation. When you read the Statement from the Heart, and I'm sure you do every night, I'm sure it's on the bedside table, on top of the Constitution, because if you read the Constitution first, you'll go to sleep. Read the Statement from the Heart. When you read it, you'll find there are no nasty words in it. It doesn't blame, it doesn't shame, it's not angry, it doesn't make any kind of demands. The aspirational words inside it are things like we call for, we look for, we seek and invite. There are no words of demand in that document. It's a gentle document of absurd compassion and generosity, that a group of people who have been decimated by the arrivals of others and had their land, their spirituality, their culture taken away from them, their language, could turn around now 200 and something years later and say, you know what, it would be good if we developed a relationship and moved together to put back what was taken away, the relationship which never actually existed. So it's a document of transformational forgiveness. It is, if we accept that document, we will get the chance to begin the process to transform Australia. It's an important process which will take some time. Remember that this process began in 1846 with the first letter, petition to Queen Victoria. There's been a large number of similar petitions to governments here in Australia. There's been petitions from various nations around Australia, such as the Barunga and petition and others that came to us, which have all been ignored. And we now are saying, let us find a way to bring this process into action. If you have a look at the slide that's sitting on your screen, it's drawn in a circle, taking those 4 elements and putting at the centre not reconciliation, but justice and wholeness. And justice and wholeness for all. I drew it in a circle, but of course for our people, we do everything in a circle. We sit in a circle, we yarn in a circle, we listen in a circle. We do and resolve our issues inside that process of sitting and listening to each other. If we stand on country and look to the horizons, we're always in the middle of a circle. It holds our wholeness, it holds our wellness, and it is in some senses medicine for us. Circles are important. It also speaks to the fact that this is a process, not a one-stop destination. Unfortunately, politically and legally, people have come to the view that it's all about the voice, and once we do that, it's all over. We don't have to do anything else. We haven't got to think about treaty. We don't have to think about truth. We don't think about Makarata. Voice will fix it all. And we've got into an oppositional binary over that. Yes, no, and the building up of fear. In actual fact, voice is simply the place where we open the door to begin a process that will bring about over the next 2, 3, 4 generations the necessarily change in where we're going in our nation. I noticed that somebody's asked what is Makarata, and I'll explain that in just a moment. We start with voice because if you're not heard, you're not seen, and if you're not seen, you don't exist. If you have a small child in your house about so long, or if you have one as a grandchild about so long, you know that you get to see them a lot because they make a lot of noise. They make sure you know that they're there because they have a voice and they let you know their existence. The trouble for Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is that because we were never included in the Constitution from the beginning, in actual fact, Alfred Deakin thought we wouldn't be here by now, we'd be long gone, because we'd all died out in the south, according to him, and we're dying out in the north and the west, even though we were being treated gently. Remember, he was the guy that wrote the Constitution. So we ended up not being in that Constitution, so we didn't get a voice inside the legal and political structures of our country. We don't exist in the birth certificate of our nation. So by having a voice, recognition in the Constitution through an enshrined voice, we begin to be heard on matters that relate to us. Voice is about another thing. It's also about sovereignty. We live under a system which is external sovereignty, which sits down on us and comes from the Commonwealth, tells us what we can do and what we can't do. Aboriginal people live with a very different sovereignty. It comes from within us. It's to do with our kinship relationships, our connections, our responsibility, our custodial ethic to each other, how we care for and relate to each other. It's relational. So what we want to do is take that level of sovereignty and put it in the Constitution right beside the other sovereignty, so that in dialogue and discussion, because we're in there now and we can have a voice, we will begin to change how the sovereignty of our nation performs. It's transformational, not instantaneous. It'll take some time, but we're putting our sovereignty in there. Some people say, you know, the voice is going to take away Aboriginal sovereignty. Nobody can take away our sovereignty. I was born under a tree, out of the ground, and I bring with me the sovereignty of my country that goes back 60,000 years. It's in here. You can take away my rights, but you can never take away the fact that I'm Wiradjuri, embedded at birth, and I'll be no different. I am sovereign. What we're asking for here is to put that sovereignty beside the Crown sovereignty, and we get some rights, the right to speak on matters that relate to us. So that's where we begin with voice. That's why we begin with voice. It's the opening of the door. And then once we've done that, you want to give the click, please? Just click anywhere. Voice is about recognition. Oops.
Keep talking about it.
The next one we go to is treaty. Once you realise there's somebody else in the space with you, and you've heard them, you've heard their voice, you know then that you have to come to an agreement about how you're going to live in this space. What is theirs? What is yours? What do you have to do in relationships so that you can live comfortably with each other and develop a process of coexistence? Not necessarily liking each other all the time. If you've ever lived in a share house as a young student, you know that that doesn't happen, but you do a treaty in the shared house all the time. Which side of the fridge is yours and which side is mine? Who gets to have the stove on this night? Who gets to, that kind of stuff you have to do. That's a treaty to learn to live with each other. So when we get to an agreement, once you've recognized somebody, you then begin to develop this treaty or agreement. And you begin to say, we are together here, so we have to work as one. And part of that process is beginning to understand that we will have conciliation. Australia has never had conciliation. We've never been one, despite the national anthem telling us that we're one and free. We've never been one and free. We've never been one. So conciliation comes because you can't do treaty. You have to have voice first. You can't do treaty with somebody that doesn't exist. If you can't see someone, you don't hear someone, you don't recognize them as equals, as we're doing in the Constitution, then you can't do a treaty. Because when I talk about people not being equal, you know about terra nullius. What I'm talking about is persona nullius, not a real person. And each of us will tell you stories over and over again of what that feels like, because we've lived through that moment when we've not been a real person to those around us. So this is about being a real person, being recognised as such, coming together with the rest of Australia and agreeing that we will move forward together in some form, with all the stops and starts that will involve. And once you've done that, you go to the bottom of the slideshow. And at the bottom, you will see there's the word truth. Truth sits at the bottom of that slide because truth, we tend to talk about truth telling today as where Aboriginal people take their clothes off in public and show their scars. This is how bad, this is what happened here, and this is what happened here. These are the bad experiences, and we tell you and you feel terrible about it and you get defensive. Truth telling isn't that. That's part of truth telling. Part of telling the story as truthfully as possible. But it's also about both the sides telling what it feels like to live in this country. One with the privileges that came from dispossession and one with the destitution that came from dispossession. And once we begin to share with that, we begin to have empathy with one another. And with one another, we begin to understand that we're not that far removed. Our experiences were different but similar. There are things that remain in us. The colonial memory stays inside each and every individual who lives in this country, because that colonial memory is, I got to have what I have because of the dispossession of others who now don't have what they used to have. How do I make sense of that? I hear that coming out in many of the defensive and angry statements people make in defense of a no case. It's as if somehow we're unable to come to grips with the story. You're not responsible for the story, but you're being asked to say yes to a way of putting that story into context to move it forward. So we have voice, treaty, truth is reconciliation. Not what we have reconciliation today, which is really just about assimilating us. This is about reconciliation based on equality. And then after that, we go to Makarrata. And you've heard Makarrata, and it sounds a little bit Disney World coming together after a dispute. Disney movie, you know, where they fight for 2 hours, they chase each other around, they yell, they scream, they accuse each other of everything, and they get to the last 2 elements of the script of the movie, the last 2 frames, and you hear the birds start to twitter and the light softens and the people come together and they smile and you've got the strings playing in the background and they take hold of each other's hand and walk off happily to live happily ever after. That's not going to happen with Makarrata. But it is about repairing relationship. What happens with Makarrata, because the process that I've talked about tonight is what we used to do BCP, before Cook and Phillip, inside of our communities. If we had a problem inside of our communities with 2 protagonists, they would have a voice, talk about their story. Then they'd have a treaty where they would agree that they have to resolve that story. Then they would have a truth telling. And this would all be done in a circle with them in the middle, elders around them, us sitting on the outside. And they would talk about what it feels like for both of them to be in that place. And various members of the community, because communities were small, would say what it feels like. And then they would go to Makarrata, which is about repairing the rift in the community. And by repairing the rift in the community, often that was done with a spearing. Now, people say spearing sounds pretty brutal, but for our people, you can't do this kind of restorative justice if somebody's 500 kilometres away in a jail cell. You can't do this process. You can't do this process by Zoom. You have to be in community. It's an issue that affects things like deaths in custody, etc., self-harm, because people are full of shame. They have no chance to resolve the issue. The community is full of shame and the community begins to fracture. And when people come back into it, the community is unable to deal with that. So what this Makarrata process is, when we get to it in some generations down the line, it's not about punishment, because the spearing isn't about punishment. The spearing is a pedagogical moment. It means that the person who's been speared in the thigh can't do the things he could do yesterday. Therefore, he has to rely on everybody in the community to look after him. His narcissism, his I am the centre of the world goes. I remind people always that there's no I in mob. There's no others, but there's no I. So he begins to understand that he has to rely on everybody else in the community, even the guy that speared him in the leg. And they realise that they have to look after him too, because they want him back as part of the community as quickly as possible. So there's a whole pedagogical learning process that goes on inside Makarrata. And in the years to come ahead, we'll get to that stage after we've done the other 3, and we'll be able to walk to Makarrata and go, you know, this is what it looks like. Because we've built the relationship on the way around. And we've got to build relationships to get to where we are. So the voice recognition in the Constitution through a voice enshrined in the Constitution is an invitation or an offer, a very generous one. And it is actually like getting Christmas and birthday presents at the same time. What Aboriginal people have said to non-Aboriginal people in Australia, and just remember, when you hear that not all Aboriginal people support the voice, remember that this was never written for Aboriginal people to agree to. You have to think about it yourself. Don't use us as an excuse for not doing the right thing. because we've been used for excuses for a long time. We don't need to be used here. You have to make up your own mind about this. But the two gifts in this is that you get the first gift when you open the package, have a look in the box, and it says you have the gift, the opportunity of saying yes. The opportunity of saying yes, I want to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in the Constitution and give them a voice. Once you've done that, once you know that that's the morally right and ethical and spiritual thing to do, remember, none of this has got anything to do with politics. This has got to do with a moral, ethical, and spiritual decision. Once you've done that, we then give you another present. Another present. And the second present, when you open it up, says, now you have the opportunity to shape your yes to be fit for purpose through your democratic process. Aboriginal people haven't told you to vote yes, they've invited you to. Aboriginal people haven't told you how to make the voice work. We want you to show us that you can live up to your yes and provide us with a process that is fit for purpose. That is fit for purpose. We've been told all of our lives how to do things and what's expected of us. So we're not going to put on our colonial boots to do the same thing back. Okay? You need to do that. You need to take that process, and you have a democratic process that does it. Legislation. We'll put a head of power on the Constitution, like the tax head of power, go to section 51 and have a look. And then you're going to go to legislation and say, well, this is what's going to work, how it's going to work. And once you've done that and it's passed, over time, yes, people might go to the High Court and say, do you think they really have the right to make that decision? Is that a good law? Well, the High Court doesn't make a decision on whether it's a good law or not. It makes a decision on whether they have the right to make that decision, to make that law. And that happens with every other law that's been put through the Constitution. It's not new. And it won't be out of control. Because we want this to work as a group of people. So I hope that puts the picture that you're opening the door to begin a process that I think your 17 and 18-year-old kids at school are ready to pick up the next bit. I know the 3 and 4-year-olds are. And then they will work through this process going forward. It's why I talk about this to school kids, because they say, you've got the job. We're going to put this thing in, but you're going to have to put the legs on it over the years. So we are opening the door and addressing our colonial memory. The final thing I would say to you, though, is if you're talking to people about this, remember, statement of the heart is about relationships. Aboriginal people live through kinship relationships. Everything begins by relational, how we connect to one another. Relationships are vital. So if you're talking to people, don't argue. Don't try and convince anyone. Help them to unpack how they think and why they think, but don't argue. Maintain the relationship. Because at the end of the day, when all the dust is cleared, we're going to have to live with each other. And we must love our neighbours as ourselves. We must carry the burden 2 kilometres instead of 1. We must go the extra mile. And it behoves us as Aboriginal people to follow that ethic, but it behoves us as Christian people to follow that ethic. Because that's just good for us all. So I think that's about it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Glenn. That's a wonderful, wonderful introduction. And I'm sure there are many questions starting to flow in. Before we go to those questions, though, only Phyllis and Kathy, as you've been listening to Glenn and as we chatted over a light meal beforehand from your own experience and talking, to your communities, what are some of the things that occur to you in response to what Glenn's laid out there, or things that it's important for us to hear?
Thank you. I think within, you know, that our community, it's not really out there the way Glenn has just put it out there. And I think there's a lot of learning that we must do to our community for them to gather information in respect of whether it's a yes or a no opinion or a vote. So I think it's something that we've got to get out there to do education in relation to our communities, because there's been such a hold up in respect of my community with displaced income, slow tires, and community alike. We and I'm inclusive with the non-Indigenous people that lives in and around Lane Sentence, and I have been asked a question about what's your opinion on the vote, and I said, well, I don't really know, because I don't know enough about, you know, what it is. And now I can take something back to what Glenn has just given to us to say, well, this is how it is, and then, but you must form your own, you know, decision on it without being a copycat of mine. And I take, you know, and in my own thoughts and my own minds about the injustice that has occurred to our people, the injustice that has been bestowed upon myself as a family, injustice where we're unable to live in within our own people because our skin was too fair. We weren't Aboriginal enough or black enough to live within that community. So we were removed by government policies and practices. And so, yeah, it just brought a lot of hurt and shame upon, not shame, but a lot of hurt upon us as people. And it was just a follow on, it's like following a sheep.
Yeah.
You know, one goes down, so we all follow. And but it leads us nowhere. It's left us nowhere. Educational, there wasn't enough learned, you know, about what has happened. We have learned, what was your terminology on Captain Cook?
BCB.
And that was our main subject in schools. I mean, none of this is sort of, you know, surfaced in respect of, you know, what the real truth was. So it leads us into the truth. It leads us, you know, what is the truth? And so we must, you know, try and again form our own decision on what was true. Look, we grew up happy, you know, to be in school, but that was a connection too. It connected us to friends which I have today, which I still call my friends from school, you know, and that's an amazing thing to have to achieve. But it just depends on your community, where you are living at the time, and what can become of the voice and treaty and then into the Makarrata, as you said. It's just something that that's another learning word for us, and it's another way of understanding what it is that should lead us into togetherness. And as Christians, we come together and worship, and we're all there and celebrating, and that is a real good thing to have, because it brings friendship, it brings, as I said, togetherness, and it just leads us into a much more deeper respect for each other.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Phyllis. Kathy, what about you?
My turn.
Your turn.
Yeah. Well, for me, I guess the voice, you know, like, is a yes for me. When it first came out, I was thinking, okay, what's this going to be like, and how's this going to play out? But then one time at St Mary's, we had, I think, a Common Grace thing, Sue. We had something there happening at St Mary's, And I was taken back, right back to the great, grandparents that walked, the Aboriginal people that walked this ancient land before white settlement. How they cared and nurtured this country. And then everything changed, the whole world changed when white settlement happened. You have to remember the history. And then the laws were made, government and the people of the country made them laws. Now, the great-grand people, parents, they weren't included in that law. They were not included. And that took me right back to that. I was reminded of that. And if that law still stands today, then that means that my grandmother, my mother, and me, and my children and my grandchildren, do we really exist and belong in this country if we're not in the law of this land? So that's how I think of that. And, that vote, it's really up to the Australian people. They need to have, I guess, that thought, to either vote yes or no. It's really up to you. But we don't want to leave it, for another 20 years, another 30 years, another 40 years. Our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, to come to have another referendum to bring this up again. So I think we need to move on this movement now. And it's really up to the people of Australia and the people in our churches to have that, I guess, that conscious vote and to think. And there was another thing, I did ask a few people in my community and that there are some no votes. And they say, we vote no, we're thinking about voting no because we don't want one Aboriginal person sitting on that, in that little parliament making decisions on other Aboriginal countries. What's that going to look like? We don't want that because they don't know, if the people up in the Northern Territory, if they get in and sit in that little thing, voice thing, they don't know nothing about my country. We don't want them making decisions. So things like that, what is that going to look like? I think that's what they're a bit scared about.
That's a really important point, Kathy, because as we've all said, this instrument is not perfect, is it, Glenn? It's not. It's the start of something, as you've said, but the alternative, as you're saying, Kathy, not pressing ahead. Where does that leave us now and in another generation, two generations' time? So if we wait for something that's perfect,
Confusion.
Yeah.
And it just brings confusion upon us as well, that there is no pathways into, where we are now, and this vote to say yes or no leads me into confusion because I've no understanding of it either, where it's going to lead, and I cannot then advise my community about a yes or a no vote until I've got a greater understanding of what it's about and what it's going to be doing for our people. And as you know, Kathy and Glenn, we've been promised a lot of promises made to us by government, and this is a good opportunity for us to have our voice and for someone to represent us. But we also need, as Kathy said, somebody from our own community, and that we can then hear that voice to say, yes, it's great. Up until then, we've got a lot to learn about it, and I can't, and unfortunately, I'll cast my vote as a no.
And also, we've got our, that treaty mob that is still active in our communities too. I think it's just throughout Victoria. And we too have to vote for them as well. We've already voted, for those fellas to sit in their little treaty box. I shouldn't have said that.
So we'll cut that.
That do that treaty, no disrespect to them. They do promote a lot of Aboriginal awareness, justice and all that, but treaties can be broken too.
Yes.
And that's what I say, treaties can be broken. It's just word of mouth, piece of paper, But this is legislation, this is law, you know, law of this country. You know, we don't want to be terra nullius no more.
Absolutely.
Can I respond to some of
Please,
that?
Glenn, please do.
I mean, these are all very genuine concerns that both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people have. When the voice becomes a body that sits outside of Parliament, but speaks into Parliament, it will be made up of a group of people. There'll be two levels, as far as we can understand from the Karma Langton report, and that two levels will be a regional voice, which will pick up the issues based on a regional level and talk to governments at that level. And there'll be the national voice that will take things out of these, look at what these people are talking at and go, there is one common theme here at the moment. We will take that. We want to talk about that at the government level and have a long-term view. By having the national voice in Constitution allows us to plan long-term. So there'll be representatives for various regions, probably more people from those regions with a larger percentage of Aboriginal people than others, but there will be representatives of each place. They will only be in there for a certain period. They can't stay forever. It'll be 6 to 8 years probably, and then they'll be changed out, and there'll be a regular change every year so that we get new people in from across the country. But the processes that they're on about will be long term. So it's, you know, we'll address that kind of issue that Kathy raised about, is there a person from Northern Territory talking about Victoria? No, there'll be a Victorian, probably 2, maybe more, sitting inside that body, and they will be representing us or the local Victorian people at that level. And that's an important thing to understand, that it's not going to be just one group who build up their own little power base. Treaty in Victoria, and that's why, and Kathy was absolutely accurate when she said, by having it in the Constitution, it can't be disbanded like treaty, like things like ASIC were disbanded on ideological grounds over many times, because it was only legislation. The treaty in Victoria, there is an argument that says that treaties could be done on state levels, because much of the issues came out of state leadership, happened in states, much of the things that need to be resolved. So Victoria has a treaty group working for the treaty here. In talking to them, they understand that will benefit from a voice, and the voice will benefit from the work that they're doing, particularly when the voice then begins to move towards treaty. They can work together to move this into that place, get this enshrined as much as that, and shift it out of the danger, as Kathy said, of legislation and having it knocked over. And of course, we have a voice legislated in South Australia, which is now going to be held up until 2024 because of the confusion between the two. And I think if we get this voice through, there'll be that work together on making that one cross-partisan. Queensland's looking at a truth-telling process. Victoria has a truth-telling process. All these are going to act as kind of interweaving processes that pull us together into the outcome thing. The other thing that Auntie Phyllis was talking about, the fact that communities need education, and I am at your disposal if you want me to come and talk to your communities. And sometimes it's better for somebody like me to come from outside, because they can yell at me and I can get in the car and go home. And I say that to parishes, you know, Vicar, don't you take it on, I'll come and talk to them. And they can have a discussion with me, which is at arm's length from you, so you're not putting your relationship at risk with them, and they can get really angry with me, and they have every right to talk about it in that process, so that we can move it forward. So I'm happy to come to Lake Tyers, happy to come
To Latrobe.
to Latrobe. I'm happy to come and talk to mobs. They might not want me there, but I'm happy to come and do that and sit down with them and hear them. One of the processes about this, what's the use of a voice if no one's listening?
Exactly.
And we have to listen to the issues raised by our Auntie Phyllis and by Kathy, and we have to listen to the people on the ground who are making those statements and help them to think it through. So,
Yeah, it's
But
really,
also-
really helpful. Yeah, please.
I also sort of think, when you said about these little groups that, it's not a little group, but the representation that we do get,
yeah,
those people should be out there talking loud enough to us as well as a community. to
yes,
Be informing us of,
absolutely.
but all of us in relation to what is ahead of us
Yep.
and what this is going to bring to the Aboriginal people and the power that it may bring. But we just need a better understanding of,
Yeah.
of what we take to I'll call it the poll, just to voice and cast our votes on the rightful and the better way of people knowing where, if it's going to be that good representation for them.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want to try and do. I want to try and come and do that with all of the groups. It was very obvious to me right back at the very beginning that most people had absolutely no idea. And every time I get up to talk, and I've done 70 plus of these since the second week in March, every time I get up to talk, a large percentage of the people in the room don't know anything much about it. And so it needs an grassroots education program. Our mob needs that, and the church needs that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much, Glenn, Phyllis, Kathy, for what you've shared so far. It's a really, really helpful conversation. We might go to some questions now. We've just got a bit over half an hour, and I see Libby writing furiously as these questions are coming in through the chat. So Libby, I might just throw to you now to articulate some of these for us.
Thank you, Bishop. So they'll just be in a little bit out of order as I've been following. So as they came in, there was a question about how does truth look like with the education system? So I think it was earlier in the conversation we were talking about the truth telling and how that's built in to curriculum in a modern sense, perhaps different than the one we might have got.
Yeah. In the Victorian schools, every Victorian state school has now a Murrong lead, whose responsibility in the school, there's usually two of them, is to promote, motivate and develop Aboriginal education inside that school through a whole lot of things, education, culture, smokings, everything that goes along with that. We've started at Glen Iris, we did a website called Empower to Teach for teachers to be able to use inside schools. I know that each year, and it's usually been around year 4 or year 5, they do an extensive module on Aboriginal culture, although it's across almost every other year level at some point. But at those levels, they go away and study everything from Stolen Generation to the Moyle Creek Massacre, a whole range of stuff, and including the voice. And it was great. I had year 5 students who could actually sit up and give me an exposition on the voice and why it was important, and they're 10 years of age. I think our schools, particularly in the primary schools, are doing an excellent job in beginning to bring about the kind of education our young people need. I actually do this kind of stuff with 3-year-olds and kindergartens as well, where we start this process in that level, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and they ask and say the most dandiest things. But if I could get all that group to vote, we wouldn't be having this conversation because it wouldn't matter what anybody else did. But we have, I think, and our teachers are really, really keen. Inside most schools or groups, clusters of schools, we have Koori Education Support Officers. And yes, they are to look after our kids, but part of their process is to help the school itself engage with our kids. So we develop a better way of doing that. So there's a lot happening in schools.
It's great.
They've got an education, it's not an education, but it's a a body in Melbourne called Victorian Aboriginal Education Association Incorporated, which I sit as a chair at the local level.
Good.
And I've been there for years. And but I'm seeing movements. I'm seeing movements now since the tour on Marong happened, and even the Marong, and that's better working with the education department which is based in Maui, and we have maybe quarterly meetings that it's either by virtual or down bums on seats at Maui. So, and then they do what they call a VRC, where all which is not vice chair, but Victorian chairs come together at Northcote in Melbourne to discuss education, and then that's taken to the secretary, which all our problems and worries and concerns are collated, and then they take that to the secretary in the education department, and that it becomes addressed. So it's moving surely but slowly, and I've been very much a big initiator of that.
It's so encouraging.
Yeah, the school history, like over the years, like when I was at school, there was nothing about Aboriginal history. It was all Captain Cook, and we were just natives and savages and all of this. And we didn't have we call them Keso workers. They still call Keso workers. We never had that in primary school. It was a little bit different in high school. They did have a Keso worker because there was a lot of Aboriginal students then, and things were changing a little bit then. They would allow, like one group of Aboriginal people to come in and talk about Aboriginal history because it was NAIDOC week. They did allow that, but the education department, and schools are changing now. Like the truth of Aboriginal history has been taught, and that's a must.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Bishop, can I just add? It's called CUST, and now through the BAI, they've introduced cultural understanding in schools, and that gives people like myself and others, and the KESOs, which is Koori educators, to present to the teachers, the cultural understanding of what we're all about and what our kids are suffering within the schools and even home environment, without elaborating too much on it. But yes, that type of thing is starting to be addressed, and we've done most of the schools in Gippsland or East Gippsland, and where I've had to chair each and every one of those meetings. And we're making gateways into education, and if there's any assistance that can be made, please contact the BAI, which is online, and they will also be of support as well.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Going on from education and recognising that people under 18 aren't eligible to participate in this referendum. So it's sort of the next generation has the education that is perhaps needed in the conversation as we move towards the referendum. Another of the questions is, can parents access, where do adults, where do parents and others learn and find out things? Are there programs? What might people do who haven't had the benefit of the changing curriculum?
I think there's a copious number of good books out there, and I can provide the Bishop with a list of books that may be of use to you to read and get parents to read. Books by Marcia Langton on Welcome to Country. There's some good books by Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu. There's Thomas Mayo's book, Henry Reynolds' book. There is a range of good, my book, but there's a whole range of good books and out there. NITV is a good place to go and watch some good documentaries and some good shows that might be might be TV shows, but carry a lot of culture in them that helps you to understand the story. We were watching last night a TV show called True Colours, and the cultural stuff in that was superb. And about how our communities work, even though it was just a TV movie. There are some good things around. My website, Red Shoes Walking, at redshoeswalking.com. There are a lot of resources and links to resources on that website. There are inside of the Anglican Board of Missions website, has got a lot of massive amount of resources sitting there that you can have a look at.
Including some from Gippsland.
Including some from Gippsland. So there's some really good resources around. If you need help, contact me and I'll do what we can to get you the assistance that you need for your families, children, to help them understand. I think one of the good things about doing it in schools is that the children go home and talk to their parents. Then their parents come to me after class next time I go into the school and say, I heard about that. Can you fill me in? Because I don't know as much as my kids. So we start that process of getting that in.
I think, Glenn, I saw on one of your slides a QR code that's got some
There's a
resources.
QR code that's got resources. That's got the website, if we can put that up.
Yeah.
If you get this QR code down, that'll take you straight to the website.
You should be able to QR code straight off your screen.
Yeah,
If you,
so,
if you grab your
that one
mobile phone.
Yeah, QR code that one.
What else have we got there, Libby? I think you're grouping some of these as we go for us,
Yes,
aren't you?
I am. So there's a question about the process of consultation. The question is, did the government consult First Nations people about how best to communicate the referendum to First Nations communities? Was there reasonable consultation?
There would have been consultation. I haven't been involved in that, so can't give you definitive positions on how that was done. Much of the process of talking to our communities has come out of organisations like Uluru.org and others. I think the government is, as it often is, a bit slow off out of the gate on these issues. And one of the troubles, one of the troubles for our people is access to information. If you're living in a remote community, or you're a poorer person, or you're a person who don't have access to the internet, or you're in a place where the internet access is bad, you don't have TV, you're not going to get the kind of information that people living in Melbourne get because it comes to you. A lot of people say that we don't know what it's about, and they obviously don't know what it's about because they haven't had the access to the information. And it behoves those who are promoting the voice to get out and talk to our mob in the places where they can, and that's why I'm offering tonight, because I think that's vital. And there's no easy answer. I don't know whether the government did the kind of work. I suspect that it probably hasn't done enough.
And perhaps if I can extend that question from my own bat to tonight's audience is largely a non-Indigenous audience. Is there a similar role for non-Indigenous Australians in yarning, talking about the voice? What would you say to that?
I would say that, again, there are quite a number of our people who are going out to communities and talking. In a slightly different role to what I'm doing. But there are people who are going and visiting remote communities, and they would be a part of the Yes campaign group and helping people to understand as much as they can in those places. Again, we must understand that there's language issues in those places. It's hard in some of those places where people are speaking of English as their fourth language. And then to get people who know about the voice in their language to go and talk to them takes a fair bit of work to get that sorted and set up. And there are people, a number of people like me who have been talking to mob in various places up and down the coast that I know of because I see them on Facebook and because I've just done this one, I've just done that one. But mine is probably more of the coordinated process than some of the others.
Thank you. Another question. is what do you have to say about those who think this will just deepen a divide, a racial divide or a cultural divide? Is there what's your thoughts?
To be very blunt, they both floated 1700 in the 1770s. You know, racism was at the basis of all of our decision making right from the first time our visitors came ashore. And racism has been set the divide between us and the rest of the population of Australia because of all the things that both Kathy and Auntie Phyllis have talked about and about the stuff that I talked about from what's inside the Constitution. We weren't putting inside the Constitution because we weren't going to be here. Next year it'll be the 200th celebration of the only war that took place, declared war that took place as part of the invasion, and that was in Bathurst when Governor Brisbane called in the troops, martial law. The troops of Britain and Ireland went to war with Wiradjuri people. And that war went on, and in where I come from, as a result of that war, all local Aboriginals were exterminated by 1876. Race has been at the basis of our whole society. And I've been called blackfella, young fella, and I'm still blackfella when I go home. And I'm 68. So it's that what we're wanting to say when we put this inside the Constitution, we're going to break down some of that divide, and we're going to bring us closer together over time. Not perfectly, not quickly, but over time. It's not going to deepen the race unless people are unable to give up their fear. If you were to ask me one thing that I would say that I've learned in the last 70 sessions is that Australia is a very fearful nation. And Australians are very fearful people. And that's what's driving this at the basis, because people are fearful of the 4% of Australia rising above themselves. And that's blunt, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's my concern too, the divide and the conquer. You know, so what will it do and how, it's not how, but it'll just divide in relation to what we're building upon now to make it unity, but this could and it may divide even deeper.
Yeah. I don't think it will, Auntie Phyllis. I
hope not.
I don't think it will, and I think there'll be people who will work at a political level to make it divide us. Let's not forget there are people who have agendas that will divide us. But I see it, if we approach this and continue to do the kind of things that you've been doing, that you're doing, and stay with those despite what happens, we will overcome this process. It can't make the situation worse than what it is now. 13-year-old boy in Queensland was in solitary confinement, 45 days, 22 days in succession. 22% of the kids in Queensland, for example, who go back because they've broken their bail laws, in other words, they were outside after 9 o'clock at night, for example, go back into remand. And we're only 7% of the population of that age group. 100% of the teenagers in jail in Northern Territory are our kids. Can't get worse.
There was a question wondering if there's a sense of heightened racism in Gippsland. It was specific to Gippsland. So have Aboriginal people in Gippsland encountered more racism in this conversation and this time of referendum talk?
I don't know, I don't know about that. There has been a lot of racism anyway. You think there is still racism. It's just, it's swept under the carpet. I know that when my granddaughter and I were out, and she had a shirt on, the NAIDOC shirt, for our elders, and there was these. My granddaughter's dark skin. She's a chunky, dark-skinned girl, and And these two people, they walked past and they stopped and they gave her, like a look, a strange look. And I looked at them and then they just walked off, but they gave her a strange look to think, well, what is that? So I guess it's, understanding that education needs to be there, but there is still racism.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, like if the referendum is a yes or no vote, there's always going to be racism. That's never going to go away because it was there from the beginning. Because we didn't look like those white fellas that stood on this land. We weren't dressed like them. We didn't live in houses like them. We were different. That's always going to be there. And racism.
Yeah. So until we confront that, we'll still continue to live out of our original sin, in the words of your prayer. It's a spiritual issue.
Yeah, it's a massive spiritual issue, and it's, God took the time to hear the voices of His people and to offer absurd compassion and transformational forgiveness to the world through Jesus, and change the world. And we all walk with a limp. We all walk differently because of that. And here we have in this a model that is very, very similar to that. I don't know who thought of it first, God or our people. We've been doing it for 65,000 years, but I'm not sure who thought of it first.
Thank God.
I know. But it's worked, and we're offering the same process. And one of the things that you have to remember as Christians, when you go to an Anglican church on a Sunday morning, you do voice. You listen to the scriptures and you speak to God. And then you do treaty. You do a creed or an affirmation of faith, and you say, this is how we're going to live together in this space. Then you do truth at the bottom, which is about confession and absolution. And then you do Macaranta, which is giving peace to each other. You've made peace with God, you give peace with each other, you do the communion together, and you walk out of that church walking with the limp. Different because you've been there. That happens every Sunday.
Yeah.
This is not scary.
No, that's a liturgical circle, isn't it?
It's
So
a Eucharistic circle.
A beautiful explanation.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And it is.
It is.
When you're looking at it, it is. That's the way it is.
We don't get all the questions you can give.
yeah, we better see how many more we can squeeze
It's
in.
okay, no, we're doing really nicely. Holly asked a question, earlier in the discussion, you mentioned that the need for social connection makes apps like Zoom a less than ideal environment for communication. The question is social media helpful and or harmful in connecting remote communities and facilitating discussion about topics like the referendum?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. The context in which I was saying that is that we can't use this process for conflict resolution by doing it on Zoom. I think Zoom and its other ways of doing this are very helpful. One of the problems for our communities is that they're often not in places that have very good internet connections and processes that allow for Zooming to be effective. I think there's room for good social media communication through one of the major platforms, although those have all gone through some massive changes, which makes it less appropriate. But we do have to find our people, and our young people are very quick on taking up social media. Our young people are on it all the time.
Yeah.
I know yours are, but we can beat you on this one. And I think there's an opportunity for us to use social media for our younger people and for our families to get more information about this. And I think you'll see going forward that the Yes campaign, well, they've been talking about it, so I'm hoping they will follow that through. And for our remote communities, it's just hard. You know, we've got a bishop in northern Queensland that takes up to 5 days to get to his furthest parish and 5 air flights to get there. And there's no real internet connection, there's no real communication, it's very unreliable. How do we help those people to understand and get this information? It's hard work.
Not a question that's been asked in the pain, but one that I've heard in a couple of other places is, why is the church involved in something that is seen as political? Why are we having this conversation in a church community?
It's not political. I think, you know, we just went through that Eucharistic circle. And I hear this often, that people sort of say, look, you know, Christians are all one together. We have our little relationship together here. And I go, yes, and it's appropriate that we understand our relationship with God through Christ. But we also must understand that as ambassadors, representatives of that process in the world, we need to make sure those in a materialistic or way get to have what they deserve as well. And that is our responsibility. If we look at this, Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, all the things that Jesus said, go and make disciples, go and make everybody understand how to be like me and give them the opportunity. And part of that process is to give them a voice in the world so that they then can make decisions about coming into church. But at the moment, that's a very dangerous place to go because they don't have a voice.
And also, it's not political. To me, it's like your conscious vote.
Yes.
You vote with your mind, with your heart. And also, I guess that spirit and that gut feeling. You've got to remember that the church did do a lot of damage to Aboriginal people. Like on the missions.
Yep.
They did. So church does, and Christians do, have this, I don't know if you should say moral, but have, their some sort of thought in voting. So it's not political.
No.
Honey Phyllis, what do you think?
I drew a blank all the time. But
Church.
yeah, just as the history of the churches, they were they had a role to play in relation to telling us what we can and can't do in respect of a lot of things. They taken language, so they tried to, and it was all in the name of assimilation, let's say, and it took the traditional ways of how the people were living, the Aboriginal people were living, took their lifestyle, took all of what they had and what they were happy living harmoniously among each other. And so the assimilation part of it, through the church, had a big role to play in relation to taking away the minds of, and changing the minds of our people to assimilating into society. And so it did damage.
Yeah. If we go back to the 15th century, 1492, Christopher Columbus goes off, and as a result of that process, we get the invention of, and then the invasion of South America and North America. The church, along with the state, were heavily involved in underwriting that process, and as Kathy said, they were responsible for things like terra nullius, the doctrine of discovery. The church and in the Western European church, let's understand that it was the Western European, it wasn't the Southern European or the Eastern, it was a Western European church.
What's the difference?
There's a lot of difference. The Southern spread churches, the Spanish and the Portuguese, and the Western church sidelined those. And then the Western church was heavily involved with the Western kings, which then exported through slavery and race The economic, the spirit, the religious, and the language across the world. First, the language was Spanish, and then it became English. You had to be a Christian, otherwise you weren't a real person, and you could be killed right across there. And the economic system was one that made the people with the power wealthier. The economic system that we have today, and got rid of the native system. That took right across the world. Out of that came the power that Britain got through its processes of slavery, etc. And slavery then paid for Britain to send their convicts to Australia and invade Australia. The church came with that, indelibly connected. We cannot avoid the fact, right from the beginning of this process of colonisation, the church has been in the centre of it. So we have to find ways now to resolve that. For people who want to read something about that, it's a book. The author is Walter Mingolo, Mingolo, from Duke University.
And interestingly, just this year, the doctrine of discovery has been repudiated. So
Yeah.
taken some time, but
For a while.
yeah, finally happens in 1490.
Yeah.
Can I throw in a bug?
Please.
But I would not change what we have for anything today with the churches. With the church that I'm associated with, yes.
And it's a healing process, you know, let this be a healing process.
Absolutely.
You know, in a journey, we have to walk this journey together,
Yes.
you know, positive journey
Yes.
towards healing
And
and
it is
reconciliation.
It is
You know,
happening,
it's-
and we've had two good bishops come before us, so I'm so proud, I stand proud of where I am today.
Oh,
Yeah. In some sense, Australia is in the place of the Israelites coming out of Egypt.
Mm.
Australia, not Aboriginal people,
Yeah.
all of us.
Yeah.
And we're in the desert at the moment. We're leaving home. We're moving out of Egypt. We're making the journey. And it's that process that we're on to.
Yeah.
Got just about 5 minutes left before we just need to begin to wrap things up, Libby. So what are the hot button topics that you've got in front of you?
We've timed all the questions beautifully, so I have no screaming questions as far as I can. So what I'd love to do is share my screen for a moment and just show you a few things that that we've offered to continue the learning for Gippsland Anglicans, but anyone else who might be talking about exploring the referendum as they prepare for their vote. So let me remember what to do. Oh, you didn't need that screen. There you go. Okay, so
There we are.
I'll minimise that. So I've just taken you to our website, so gippslandanglicans.org.au, and you'll see that Aboriginal ministry is one of our key pieces of ministry, and it sits right up here on our menu at the beginning. I'll come back to that, but if you go to resources over here on this side and use the drop down, at the most recent edition is the Referendum 2023. So this is a page that has been put together. It's a starting point. It's absolutely not the be all and end all, but it is a good starting point for some websites and some journalism and some articles and news. For you to just follow the links through. So everything's linked in. There's so tonight's webinar, you could click that and come to the registration. You might like to look at the Uluru Statement free short course, and that was the beginning of this process towards the voice. If you want more information about how the referendum, the process of that, there's some information from the AEC. and some disinformation registers. There's amazing things out there that you may not have had a chance to look for yet. Some FAQs, and then just about this referendum in particular. So there's some information here. So there's lots to get you started. There's a list of articles, news and opinion of varying types. We've tried to filter for publicly available or freely available articles, things that are not social media publishers. They have a bit of journalistic rigour to them. So it's, but again, if follow the way you need to follow the information and have a look through. So there's quite a bit that you can read between now and then. There's also a sample of things from a Gippsland place, from Gippsland publications, and some radio interviews with some different politicians. We're trying to present a range of views for you to explore. Our hope is that people are engaged, exploring good sources of information, educating themselves and others on the referendum to make the best decision that can be made, and really looking into our hearts to make that decision for the future. There's a couple of video resources too, and at the end of the page, if you want to test what the Anglican view is against other views, there's a few links to get you started there. So we think it's a good start, and I haven't read everything here yet, but if you beat me to it, you've got some other links, please email us at hello@gippslandanglicans.org.au, send it through to us, and we can update our lists really quickly. Just before we move away from the website, I'd like to make sure that you've seen the Aboriginal Ministry information. So this is where you'll find out more about the work that Auntie Kathy and Phyllis, Auntie, what am I saying? Auntie Phyllis and Kathy do. I'm sorry. And it'll tell you a little bit about the ministry and who we work with and what we're connected to. It tells you a little bit about Gippsland. So you know, interestingly, you can see the Gunai-Kurnai country is a large proportion of our region, but it's not the only country that we cover. We are a big place covering many First Nations countries and intersecting with those. So yeah, we have these things too, because we want all Gippsland Anglicans to understand this really well. There's some more links if you want to go and find out some more things from Aboriginal organisations. There's a little video clip from an interview from a couple of years ago. But what's also very important is your support for our Aboriginal ministry. And you'll find a button here that will take you to a place where you can make a donation or a pledge and pledge funds towards supporting our Aboriginal ministry. And this page will give you a little bit more information. So we invite you to think about that. If there's some dollars you can spare towards the support for Aboriginal ministry. It is so important that this ministry continues in Gippsland to support our Aboriginal communities in the ways that are culturally fitting and right and safe. And Auntie Phyllis and Kathy do that so well. So your support for that ministry is really, really welcome. And there's options there if you'd like to pledge, donate, direct deposit, and above anything, above probably everything, is to really talk about Aboriginal ministry and be really proud of what we do in Gippsland to support our communities as best we can. We'd love to keep doing that. There's a few resources there if you want to download some stuff. Oh, and a prayer, sorry, I shouldn't skim past that. A reconciliation prayer, which has come from a video, if you were to watch that too. So lots on our website to help you continue tonight's thinking and tonight's exploring. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you.
now.
Thank you to our wonderful development officer, Libby Williams,
My pleasure.
and to our registrar, Richard Connolly, for his technical and other support. And Richard, I think we're going to scoop up the chat comments and questions, so that we'll make sure that we continue to find ways of addressing those. If you haven't had a chance to get yours aired this evening, they won't be lost. And thank you everyone for your contribution and those really thoughtful reflections and input that you've given. In a moment, I'm going to close with a prayer written by the late Bishop Arthur Malcolm, which seems apposite to tie together some of the threads of our conversation this evening. But I just wondered, Glenn, Kathy, Phyllis, whether you had any last words you wanted to offer, any encouragement. You happy?
Yeah, we're happy.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I did forget to mention TGA.
Oh yes, thank you, Libby, please.
Sorry. The thing I did forget to say was that our TGA, the Gippsland Anglican publication, has been producing and publishing a number of articles over these months. So please pick up a copy of the TGA, have a look through. There's amazing perspectives and information for you to connect with in that format as well. Thank you.
Of course, you can read that on the website as
You
well.
can read that on the website.
But also talk to your friends, you know, like people that don't go to church, talk to them about, you know, what you've learned tonight. Share that story, you know, with them.
That's our pedagogy. If you've learned something tonight, it's your responsibility to share it with somebody tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please let's, in a Zoomy kind of way, show our deep appreciation and respect for our panellists tonight, our guest, and Lockery, only Phyllis, Reverend Kathy. It's been a wonderful, wonderful and enlightening and challenging, appropriately challenging conversation. Deeply grateful. So just before we bless you into the rest of your evening, let us pray. Bishop Arthur Malcolm's prayer. Lord God, bring us together as one, reconciled with you, reconciled with each other. You made us in your likeness. You gave us your Son, Jesus Christ. He has given us forgiveness from sin. Lord God, bring us together as one, different in culture, and given new life in Jesus Christ, together as your body, your church, your people. Lord God, bring us together as one, reconciled, healed, forgiven, sharing you with others as you have called us to do. In Jesus Christ, let us be together as one. Amen. Now, Phyllis, would you do the honour of blessing us as we go?
Thank you all. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds, and in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst you and remain with you all forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Go well. Good night. We'll see you again soon, I hope. Thanks for joining us.